I'm going to start out with Mr. Stalin. This Congress, I've engaged in extensive oversight relating to cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure and security of Americans' people's data. I've written to federal agencies and the private sector about cyber attacks and the steps taken to protect them. So to you, much of the equipment used in the administration of U.S. critical infrastructure, particularly telecommunication, is or was manufactured in China. What are the national security implications of Chinese technology and equipment in our networks?
Thanks for the question, Senator. The implications are significant from a variety of perspectives. Probably the lowest hanging fruit is we still have a lot of Chinese Huawei and ZTE equipment in small service providers in rural America. There was a rip and replace bill that was put in place in 2020, partially funded, funded to the tune of about 40%, $1.9 billion, but there's another $3.3 billion needed to pull out that Huawei gear from these service providers, typically small, more than 6,000 sites across America, and oh, by the way, many of them are very close to military installations. Senator Daines has put forth a bill to address that in this Congress. So that's about the lowest hanging fruit we have. But without knowing what's in the products, whether they be products that have an American name on them or a trusted country's name on them or a Chinese company's name on them, we don't really know what's in there. And that's why we started Supply Chain Security SCS 9001. It requires a full bill of materials. It requires understanding from a zero trust perspective where all the software comes from. Synopsys earlier this year did a study of looking at 1,000 code bases of various enterprise equipment and found that 96% used open source software and more than 70% had critical vulnerabilities. So this is pervasive. It's a massive issue.
Okay, Mr. Fish, the Office of National Cyber Director has identified memory safety typically represents 70% of the cyber risk facing legacy and modern IT systems. For the manufacturers of these IT systems, what would you recommend they do now to prevent memory safety exploitation?
Thank you. Chinese laws require a huge amount of data sharing for companies that have large presences in China and even small presences. And every Chinese entity that has at least 3 party members must have a party cell. So it must have official party representation inside the businesses. So for companies in the memory safety industry, and frankly for companies in a wide range of sensitive industries, they need to understand that if any part of their supply chain touches China, there are very concrete risks with that, and they need to have a strategy for mitigating those risks.
Okay. And Mr. Myers, last December, the DNI issued a public bulletin about the risk of foreign commercial spyware. In June, I introduced a bill that we entitled App ID Act with Senator Cortez Masto, which would require apps owned and controlled by foreign adversary companies to disclose that fact to users. Could you explain the threat posed by foreign commercial spyware to everyday American data privacy and steps that we can take to mitigate the threat?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think foreign commercial spyware is, there's a couple of ways to kind of consider what that is made up of, right? There's spyware, which is meant to be spyware, right? Offensive in nature. That is one set of concerns. The other side of that is data collecting code. As an example, on a mobile application, it might use a library that is collecting information about the user and then feeding that back for advertising purposes. And that information can also be used to garner information about the user, where they are, what they're doing, what they're looking at, what they're even saying. And so, along those 2 lines, I think that they need to be considered differently. Foreign commercial spyware, I think, would be more along the lines of a offensive tool that would be regulated similar perhaps to like a weapon system. The more concerning would be the software that is collecting information unbeknownst to the user and how that information is being used users don't even know that that library is loaded in the application that they're using.